It's Friday, August 12th. Wrong month by quite a long shot. And this is Seaside Chats, the Field Goals newest podcast with me, Kenneth Arthur. And with me today is ESPN's Sheil Kapadia, where we're going to be talking about the Seahawks. And Sheil, they've wrapped up their open training camp practice this week. And tomorrow they have their game against the Kansas City Chiefs. And obviously a lot of talk about offensive line, and just starting with it seems to be the linchpin of the offensive line as far as where the pieces will ultimately fall, seems to be the ability of Jamarcus Webb to play and start at right tackle. Where do you see Jamarcus Webb right now in terms of his standing on the offensive line?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think right tackle is sort of the position where, depending on what happens there, it can kind of have a ripple down effect to the rest of the position. So Jamarcus Webb, he had the calf injury back in the spring, missed some time, which I think affected him. And then in the summer, just this week, he's had a knee issue the past couple of days where it looked like he had a big brace on his right knee. So I'm not even sure that he's going to play in the preseason game. And when he's been out there, quite frankly, he has not been that impressive. This is a guy who's on his third team in 4 years. The Seahawks thought they saw something from him in free agency and brought him in. But right now, that's kind of a huge question mark of what his role is going to be on this team. And it all starts with when he can get healthy.
Obviously, a lot of the attention is also focused on Germain Ifedi, the first-round pick of the Seahawks this year out of Texas A&M, and then him moving at guard, and then whether or not he's played so well. What is sort of the expectations now of Ifedi as, going into a couple weeks of practice now and on through the mini camps? Do you expect him to be ready perhaps to move outside? And how big of an issue are all these training camp fights that he seems to be getting into?
Yeah, I think, I'll start with kind of the scuffles. I think they do like a lot of that. I think Richard Sherman said that Pete Carroll will be the guy who's like, hey, calm down, and then kind of whisper in your ear, good job, this sort of thing. So especially from a rookie, from an offensive lineman going up against veterans like Michael Bennett, I do think they like to see that toughness out of him and that he won't back down. So from an attitude standpoint, I think they like everything they see from Ifedi. Now, that's one thing. Number two is, can he block people? Can he move people in the run game? Can he protect Russell Wilson? And that's why the preseason is going to be so important. I think in an ideal world, they would like to keep him at right guard, and that's where he's had all his practice reps this entire offseason. So I think they would like to keep him there. It's an easier position than right tackle to learn. But part of me does wonder that if this Jamarcus Webb thing is not working out and you don't see another guy on the roster who can really fill in. Remember, they signed Jahari Evans earlier this week, a veteran right guard. So it's kind of like, is that combination of Evans, Ifedi, could that be your best two-man combination on the right side? I think that's something they'll have to figure out.
And finally, sort of wrapping up the offensive line, perhaps the player that we've talked about the least during training camp as far as the starters go would be center Justin Britt, which is kind of surprising given that he hadn't been a center before this year. How are all the reports so far on Britt, and does it look like he's going to be able to hold on to that position?
Yeah, I just talked to Daryl Bevel yesterday, and he talking about the offensive line. My biggest takeaway was that he's kind of really liked what he's seen from Justin Britt, and I left that conversation thinking it would be a pretty big upset if Britt were not the starter at center in week one. Now, having said that, I don't know what level he's going to be able to play at. Again, we need to see how he looks in the preseason. That's not an easy position in terms of setting the protections and working with Russell Wilson and making sure you're getting the right looks before the snap, all those different things. So this is a guy who's moved from tackle to guard and now to center. So this is kind of his last spot here to make an impression and to be a starter on this football team. So I think he's going to get that opportunity. I think they've liked what they've seen so far, but certainly it's a question mark when you have someone who's never played there before.
The Seahawks and Pete Carroll are always going to eventually lean back and rely on that run game. And this is the first year in the Pete Carroll era since the first few games of 2010 that Pete Carroll will not have Marshawn Lynch. Obviously, that's a new era, and the way that they have to run the ball and treat the run game in the backfield is going to change regardless of what happens. But with injuries and everything, it's been pretty interesting to see the amount of shuffling and having to pull George Farmer from the defense and doing a bunch of things just to make up for it. Through it all, it seems like Christine Michael has had the best opportunity of his NFL career to carve out a job for himself. How has Christine Michael sort of responded to this opportunity to be the number one back? And do you think that he has secured himself like an actual part of the offense this year? I'm assuming if he's even locked in a roster spot, do you think that is guaranteed now?
It's one of the more fascinating storylines, I think, of the summer so far. You know, I know Seahawks fans are used to kind of every summer hearing the Christine Michael tales, and this the year he's turned it around and he gets it. And then we saw last September, that the team essentially gave up on him, trading Michael to the Dallas Cowboys for that 7th round pick. But yeah, everyone I talked to Sherm Smith, the running backs coach, this week, and he was pretty honest in saying that he was so frustrated coaching Michael the first time around, a guy with that much talent, that much raw ability, and he just couldn't kind of get it to rise to the surface. And so the theme has been from the coaching staff that Michael has really had, Darrell Bevell called it an awakening, that he sort of has this newfound appreciation now that he was let go by the Seahawks, essentially cut by the Cowboys, essentially on the Washington practice squad before finally coming back at the end of the season. So I think they like everything they've seen from him. I still think Thomas Rawls is going to be that bell cow, that primary ball carrier, assuming that he's healthy and ready to go. But right now, I think Michael is in position to have that number 2 role. And we know the number 2 running back in this offense does get carries, and someone who could come in if Rawls were to go down with injury. So all the signs this summer have been positive with Michael.
It seems like you can look around at the different position groups and the skill position groups, and it's like I think a lot of Seahawks fans this year, especially right now, they're looking at it and they might see 4 tight ends that they like, with Brandon Williams having a good training camp. They might see 4 or 5 running backs that they like and they don't want to let go of because people have been given opportunities. And really, a lot of the running backs have come up with big plays. They look at the receivers and it's like they don't want to lose Kenny Lawler because he's got great hands, or Casey Williams and Kevin Smith, or maybe even if you got the deeper cuts like Hunter. There seems like to be too many guys to keep this year, especially. Which one of these maybe perhaps fringe guys, roster bubble guys, have you seen over the last week or two that on offense that you think has a real shot to make this team that wouldn't have thought that way a week ago?
I think it's probably the tight end you mentioned, Brandon Williams. This is someone who he's been in the league. He was in Carolina, and at the very minimum, I think he's a guy who they believe can play special teams for you and be a core special teams player. But I've really been impressed with what he's done offensively. I mean, every day he's making a catch during the team period, and it doesn't have to be the flashiest highlight type catch, but he's getting open against what looks to me at times the first team defense, and I haven't seen him drop a ball yet, and he's physically he's a specimen. So I think there's a lot to like about him, and I think you look at that wide receiver tight end group, when I was just looking at my 53-man roster projection, I think you're probably looking at like 9 guys from those 2 positions. And I think it's a real possibility that they keep 4 tight ends, and that Brandon Williams joins those other guys, Vanette, Wilson, and obviously Jimmy Graham having returned here.
Do you see any one of those, perhaps anybody on offense, if you're looking perhaps at a Luke Wilson maybe, or a Christine Michael maybe, but any of these veterans perhaps that might find themselves on the outside looking in because they got a job stolen away? I mean, we've seen it with Pete Carroll many times before in the case of veterans not making the team, last year being the 2 running backs, Christine Michael and Robert Turbin. Any veterans that right now should perhaps be concerned about their jobs?
I mean, I've thought about this, and I can't really put my finger on it on any of those guys. Luke Wilson, you need that guy because you don't know what Jimmy Graham is going to be week one and who's going to be your starting tight end. Are you going to go with a rookie or Brandon Williams? No, I think you would probably go with Luke Wilson as the guy who's been here and kind of knows the offense and can block a little bit and certainly can catch the football. So I don't think he's going anywhere. Christine Michael, to be honest, entering training camp, I did think he was on the roster bubble. Just given that they drafted those 3 running backs, I thought there was a chance that he might not make it. But from what I've seen from him this summer, and we'll see how the preseason plays out, I just think he's in a very good position to make the team. So I can't really name one of those veterans that I think is going to be a surprise roster cut right now.
Concerns about CJ Prosise not practicing yet? Any concerns from the coaches about the amount of time he's missing?
Yeah, absolutely. Pete Carroll was asked about that, and I think he used the word like unfortunate and frustrating. So Prosise is a guy you don't hear coaches often say as soon as they draft someone that, hey, we have a specific plan for this player. But that is what they said about Prosise. I mean, he was going to come in and fill that Fred Jackson role and be a much more dynamic player than Jackson was at the end of his career, be someone who was going to catch a lot of balls, I think, on third down, who they were going to try to get out in space and really feature for maybe a handful of plays each game. And now all of a sudden, he got injured. It was the first drill of the first practice of training camp. And so he has not done anything since then. He's had that hamstring issue. And until he gets back, it's really a question mark about what kind of role he's going to have on this team. So I think that process where you thought, hey, this is a guy who could really help them week one and be a part of the offense, I think you have to push everything back a little bit and delay that and see when he can get back on the field and then when he can actually make an impact.
Defensively, there are a few position battles, specifically, outside cornerback and nickel situations, and the depth chart and the order that the cornerbacks will be going in between Deshaun Shedd and Jeremy Lane and Thorold Simon, and perhaps someone else like Ty Smith or Marcus Burley or Stanley John Baptiste. How do you see that playing out so far? Is anybody taking the lead?
I don't think so. I think what their plan is right now it's basically you have 3 starting cornerbacks, Sherman, Shedd, and Lane. Obviously, Sherman is never going to come off the field, and I think Shedd and Lane, we saw this at the end of last year, I think they're really going to be matchup plays. If you have a shifty receiver, if you have a vertical threat, a guy you really think as an athlete who can test you downfield, I think that's when you're going to see Jeremy Lane match up with that guy on the outside, and maybe Shedd will play a little bit more nickel. If you have a bigger, more physical receiver who might not be the fastest guy or the shiftiest guy, but brings that physical element to it, I think that's when you're going to see Shedd play on the outside. So this is something they've already done. They tried this out at the end of last year, and I've asked Chris Richard about it. I think he's comfortable doing it. So I really think Shedd and Lane are going to both be sort of starting caliber defensive backs. Obviously, when they're nickel, both those guys are going to be on the field. And then Thorold Simon is the X factor. He's a guy who's talked about every summer. Can he stay healthy? Can he realize his potential? And if he's able to make that leap and have a tremendous preseason, then yeah, there's a chance he could leap those guys and really have an impact. But right now, I would say he's probably that 4th cornerback who might come in for a few snaps a game, or will be competing with the starters if they have a hiccup or an injury.
One of Pete Carroll's best little roster tricks is it seems like if he can get these versatile guys that can play 2 or 3 positions, then it allows him to have other positions where he might be sharing the position between multiple guys, say like 2 right defensive ends, or in the case of the Sam linebacker position, it seems like he might have 3 guys right now. Between Mike Morgan, Cassius Marsh, and Eric Pinkins, is anybody going to really win that job? Is it going to be, well, we're going to have him in passing situations and him in rushing situations? And how does it all shaked out so far?
Well, I think someone is going to win the job, and I think Pinkins is the guy that they would like to win that job. He's the one who has the best coverage skills and probably has the most upside, I think, of any of those 3 players. It's going to be a matter if he can kind of win the competition here in the preseason and win that job. But I think they will settle on one guy. Now that position is really just a 2-down position, or maybe even less than that when they're in their base defense. So I think when they're in their base, they'll settle on one guy and he'll be the starter. But when they're in nickel and in their sub packages, Frank Clark is going to come in and be that right defensive end, teamed up next to Michael Bennett, and be the pass rusher. So Bruce Irvin filled both those roles. He was the Sam linebacker in the base defense, and then he's the right defensive end in nickel. I think you're going to see it split up with a couple different players this year. Whoever wins the competition, and then Irvin coming in on, I'm sorry, and then Frank Clark coming in passing situations.
One thing, in the first few days of training camp, I felt like I heard about Brandon Browner a lot in the first 2-3 days. And then I realized, today or yesterday, just sort of that I haven't even heard the name Brandon Browner. I haven't seen a picture. I haven't seen any sort of reports on Twitter. What's going on with Browner in the last couple of weeks? Is he still, what position is he sort of locking himself into, or is he on the roster bubble?
I think he's going to make the team. It wouldn't be the biggest surprise if somehow he was released, but I feel pretty strongly that he's going to make the team. He's been playing with the second team at safety, trying to learn basically that Cam Chancellor role. And, he still has been making some plays. There was a shovel pass the other day that he kind of blew up, and the defense, Richard Sherman, Michael Bennett, those guys went nuts. So I think the training camp has really been about having him focus on learning or relearning the safety position. Now, when the regular season starts, I do think you can use him in a few different ways. One is, he can be a backup safety. He can be a special teams guy. But I also think, and I thought this going back to the spring, that he's someone you can match up against athletic pass-catching tight ends. That's been an issue for this defense. If there was one weakness last year, that's what it was. I think they ranked 26th at covering the tight ends when you look at Football Outsiders rankings, the way they do that with different positions. So I think Browner is someone who can come in those specific situations. His snap count might fluctuate week to week depending on who you're playing, but I do think they see him in that role, and I do think, again, he's going to make the team.
Sheil, Kapadia, I have two more questions. Just this game tomorrow against the Kansas City Chiefs. It's week one. As a lot of people saw with the opening night last night in the NFL, is you're going to see names that you didn't know, and there's all types of getting deep on the rosters right now in the first week. What do you want what would you say to fans what to watch for in the Seahawks' first preseason game against the Kansas City Chiefs tomorrow? What to look for? What are going to be the things that you're going to be most curious about seeing?
I mean, number one is the offensive line, and we started the podcast talking about that. Who lines up where? How do they look? How do they rotate? All those different things, because there's so many guys on this roster right now that could either be starters or could not be on the 53-man roster when they make cuts. So they've got to get that figured out for sure, and a lot quicker than they did last year. And then number two is probably the rookies. The running back, Alex Collins, he should be healthy and ready to go and get a lot of work. How does he look? I'm curious to see that. And Trevon Boykin, the quarterback, undrafted free agent. If the season started today, this guy would be your backup quarterback to Russell Wilson. It's always possible that they bring in a veteran at some point down the road, but I do think, I do believe them when they say they've liked what they've seen from him so far, and I want to see how he does against an opposing defense. So those are a few of the things I'm focusing on.
Finally, I got to ask just what your thoughts were, because we did have football last night, and you can't take too much away from the stats because the people are trying things out. But you did cover the Philadelphia Eagles for many years. Thoughts on Carson Wentz? He goes 12 of 24, 89 yards, 1 interception. As far as rookie debuts go, how do you feel about the what you saw out of the Eagles last night in Carson Wentz?
I thought he looked a lot better than those numbers indicate. I think he had 3 drops from the receivers, and that receiving core is not very good, and that's going to be an issue for them all year. But I think with those guys, you're just seeing, do they look the part? And he's big, and he's got the arm strength. And, there was one play where he climbed in the pocket and found a receiver downfield. So I don't think it's going to be long before Eagles fans are so sick and tired of watching Sam Bradford and say, just get Carson Wentz on the field. He'll take his lumps. We're not going to be good this year, but at least it provides some entertainment value. So I thought it was an encouraging debut, despite what those numbers indicate.
Sheil, Kapadia, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Where can people find you on Twitter?
It'll be at Sheil Kapadia, and then continue to have reports on the Seahawks page on ESPN.com.
When those are excellent reports, really appreciate all the work that you're doing over there at ESPN. Makes my job easier and makes it easier for fans to follow the team and everything, and love what you're doing at ESPN. So thank you so much again for your time.
Appreciate that, Kenneth. Thanks a lot. Take care.
You too. That's Sheil Kapadia of ESPN. I once again have messed up a pronunciation. It's not the first time. I'll shoot for it being the last. I'm going to give it a shot. See if I can't pronounce some names correctly in the coming year. Perhaps right here on Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. As said, the Seahawks play a game against the Kansas City Chiefs tomorrow, Saturday, August. Is it 18th? Earlier today, I said it was July. Nope, it's August 13th. This is 8:33 in the morning. Very early for a lot of people. But Seahawks game, Chiefs, 1:30 Pacific time on standard and on Saturday. The Seahawks and the Chiefs. Chiefs-wise, I mean, you're going to be looking at, what's the depth chart going on here? What are you going to be looking out for in terms of the Kansas City Chiefs? Let's take a quick look at their backup quarterback situation, because I know that they have signed Nick Foles, so that could be something of interest perhaps to watch. The Seahawks, a little bit familiar with Nick Foles thanks to his time with the Rams last year. But their backup situation is still Tyler Bray at quarterback, Aaron Murray at quarterback, Nick Foles at quarterback, and Kevin Hogan, the Stanford rookie, at quarterback. So the Chiefs have 5 quarterbacks right now. You would think not even see Alex Smith. You got to have, even if you gave 1 quarter to everyone, you still wouldn't have enough for all those quarterbacks. I'm not sure that they're going to find out a whole bunch more from, some of these guys. But so the Seahawks could get a lot of Kevin Hogan. I'm not sure if there's been any injuries there. And then it's like you start to cut into the second division of their receivers. Frankie Hammond is one of their receivers. Chris Conley. I know this guy. I've interviewed him before, out of Georgia. He makes Star Wars fans films. Tyreek Hill is a guy that Joel Thorman set on field goals. Is Joel Thorman of Arrowhead Pride, that Tyreek Hill was going to be one of the more exciting players on the Chiefs this year. So that's perhaps something to look out for. They've signed Rod Strader from the Oakland Raiders, and they've got D'Anthony Thomas, one of the more exciting players. And hey, we can root for these guys to be exciting. It's a preseason game. It doesn't matter. Jamal Charles, I'm sure you won't see him. Charkandrick West and Spencer Ware. We're familiar with Spencer Ware. Now Davis. The Chiefs really are a pretty deep team, much more deep perhaps on offense than they are talented right there at the top. Jeremy Macklin's obviously one of the better receivers in the NFL, but and they've got the tight end Travis Kelce, so they do have some good talent. Look, the Chiefs are a good team, so no surprises there. Their highest drafted rookie is Chris Jones, the defensive lineman. So it could be a situation where maybe he sees a lot of time, and obviously defensive linemen are going to give the Seahawks a tough time this year, probably. Jay Howard, the former Seahawk. Dontari Poe seems like the type of nose tackle that would really give the Seahawks problems. And then, of course, coming from the outside, Justin Houston, Derek Johnson, Tamba Hali. D Ford, not sure exactly how his career development's going after being a first-round pick. And I think that, obviously Eric Berry is still not there because he's holding out for a long-term contract. And Jerron Johnson, this is a guy that the Seahawks fans are familiar with, and he might be playing since, he was recently signed, and this is the first preseason game. So definitely stuff to look out for there. And for the Seahawks, like Sheil said, that offensive line, how's it going to be lined up? Who's going to be coming in the second unit, and how are they going to look? And will they outperform the first group? And will it matter because they're going up against the second string defensive line, But the running back situation, I'm kind of want to see, George Farmer. It's always interesting to see a guy who's not typically in that side of the ball get some work in. We've seen with the Houston Texans on Hard Knocks last year when Charles James had to take some carries because they had injuries at running back. It didn't work out for Charles James necessarily, but as far as being a running back, but I'm kind of interested in seeing George Farmer. Unfortunately, I think we're going to see a lot of Cameron Marshall and guys that even if you follow training camp every day, you don't know anything about because it is the first preseason game. Definitely just kind of curious to see how those cornerbacks sort of stack up and what's going to be the situation there, because I think the issues at cornerback probably cost the Seahawks a game or two early in the season last year, where they lost because they couldn't, hold a lead against the Bengals or the Panthers. And that's going to be sort of an issue of concern. So hopefully they can figure that out. And obviously they don't feel as rushed or forced to start someone at cornerback simply because he was a veteran that they signed for a good amount of money. And I don't think that Pete Carroll necessarily he's proven that he doesn't really mess around, but because of the injury to Jeremy Lane, they weren't prepared for anyone. And then Kerry Williams was the guy that was there. So it's hopefully not going to be the same kind of situation this year. This is Seaside Chats. And, obviously that segment with Sheil, that's what you're going to want to listen to. This me single man ranting. There's not so much else going on. But hey, it's my show, and that's the way it goes. Hey, that's a new catchphrase. Thanks for listening. You can follow on Twitter at Field Goals. Go to fieldgoals.com. Download this podcast, Seaside Chats, and send me postcards. Thanks for listening to this show.